Hey everybody, and welcome to Cappuccino Cunnilingus episode number 34. I'm your host, Robert, and I am here today to talk about something that not a lot of people have this opinion on. And I say this because I tend to think of myself a little bit of an outsider with this opinion. Many people would say that, whitewashing in Hollywood is bad. And yes, it is bad. And there needs to be more diversity to accept more people into roles that are traditionally more uh, Asian, if we're talking about an anime adaptation, or even if we're talking about something set in France or Germany or even Russia. I would appreciate it if we had more diversity in casting choices. However, I'd like to talk about some really in-depth stuff that doesn't necessarily get brought up because people are so worried about stopping whitewashing completely. And the two things I would like to talk about today are the TV show, the Netflix Marvel series Iron Fist, and the Netflix adaptation of the Death Note anime series. And I want to talk about these because I feel like a lot of people that want to talk about whitewashing in Hollywood don't understand source material to begin with. And for me, source material is what makes the argument if you're going to talk about whitewashing. Now, to start off, let's start with Iron Fist because I feel like that's the one thing that we're gonna base this whole argument off of. So to start, Iron Fist has always been a character by the name of Daniel Rand, and Danny Rand is the child of uh, billionaires, honestly, maybe millionaires depending on the time that you started reading, but currently billionaires. He is the heir to Rand Industries, and his backstory, for those that aren't up to date on comics, is that he was in a plane crash as a child, probably around preteens, I would say between like 8 and 12 years old. The plane crash took place for him, and in the plane crash, his parents died, and when he awoke from the plane crash, uh, he was brought in to the mystical city of Kunlun by the monks that guard the city. And the monks that live in the mystical city of Kunlun, have a deep rooted history in Kung Fu. They not necessarily worship, but their protector, their deity, whatever you wanna call him or her or whoever shall wield the power of the Iron Fist. That is their person of choice that they wish to put their weight behind. And Iron Fist could be anybody. Anybody who uh, passes the trials of the legendary mystical city of Kunlun. Um, there really isn't much more to it. There have been previous Iron Fists before Danny Rand. However, the story of Marvel Comics' Iron Fist is the story of Danny Rand. And a lot of people will say that, in the 70s and 80s when Marvel originally took that character out and started shopping it around and made comics about him, the argument could be made that they wanted to have a white guy there, and that they felt that it would be easier to market it as a white guy who knows kung fu than an Asian American or a straight up Asian or even a black guy or, God forbid, a woman at that time that knows kung fu. And I would assume that at the time, yeah, the reading market might have been a little bit more skewed towards, single white males who like to read comics. But even back then, the Avengers had female members that were full time in their positions. And, with a character like Iron Fist, it came about during a huge revolution in American cinema. We had the introduction of the real kung fu movie in America. And to completely discredit that movement in America would be a travesty on film. We would basically be taking an entire decade out of film history, and that wouldn't be right. I would assume that at the time Marvel wanted to incorporate they wanted to put their impression on the story of the Kung Fu action flick. And by doing that, they wanted to introduce Iron Fist. And if you want to talk about how ahead of the curve Marvel was at that time, eventually putting Iron Fist and Power Man Luke Cage together, that's diversity right there. What you're talking about is taking two characters who by themselves represent many different things. However, when you bring them together, you create the heroes for hire. And when you're talking about coming out of the late 60s and early 70s, where racism is at a much higher tension level than they are, now, arguably, we have this duo of billionaire white guy with a middle-aged man from Harlem. And that team up sets the stage for 30 years down the line, where we now have a Netflix TV show based on both of these characters, a TV show where they team up together, and possibly down the line, their own spin-off series where it's just them two together. Just from this set of comics that started arguably in a time where it could have been a lot of a harder sell to do it. But it took hold and it sold really well. And my argument against a lot of the people that are pushing back against Iron Fist is that if you want to push for diversity in casting, look at your source material first before you go after somebody for getting cast in a role. Danny Rand was never an Asian man. He was never Asian American. He was never of any Asian country's descent. He was white. He was a European Caucasian male in America. He is of European descent. He is Caucasian. There is no arguing that. Danny Rand is white. To push for anything else other than that source material would be wanting to alter the history of that source material. That would be wanting to change the history of what comic book fans know. If you wanted to have an Asian American in that role, you should ask Marvel to put an Asian American in the suit first, in the comics. How you establish somebody in the comics and creating that market for them could easily out-influence anything that a TV show could do. Because Marvel Comics is a mainstay in the comic universe. And if you're going to ask them of anything, especially now, they've had their run of, diversity comics now where they haven't really sold well, but they've touched on a market that will buy them. If you wanted to have an Asian American Danny Rand or an Asian American Iron Fist in general, you could do that. And I'm pretty sure somewhere in an Elseworld comic or some other form of, not in the main continuity of Marvel Comics, there has been a reference to an Asian or Asian American Iron Fist. I'm sure there has been. But Danny Rand is white. And if you want to alter that, you are part of the problem. If you're talking about wanting to change the course of comic book history. Now, if a lot of people that are listening to this say, how could you say that? That is completely insensitive. Well, it's not. It isn't insensitive because if you're gonna scream and want justice for something, you have to have a basis first. And there is no basis for an Asian or an Asian American Iron Fist other than that there could have been one previously before Danny Rand. And if you're going to make a TV show on a Marvel character, that Marvel character is Danny Rand, who is the Iron Fist. If Marvel wanted to do a different backstory, they could, but they'd have to pick somebody other than Danny Rand. But they don't have anybody else in their catalog that they could claim as an important character that is important enough to be able to make that TV show about. The reason Danny Rand is Iron Fist is so that way he can play off of Luke Cage. It's so that way he can incorporate himself into the Defenders. It's so that way he could be a mainstay in New York to maybe eventually team up with Tony Stark or team up with Spider-Man or Moon Knight, Blade, Ghost Rider, whoever else just so happens to appear in New York City. Doctor Strange even. It wouldn't surprise me if Doctor Strange eventually showed up or is referenced. But to be able to make the argument for changing I can't think of the word. To change the ethnic background of a character is completely baseless on that fact. And I don't find it insensitive to say that Danny Rand should always be white, because he should be. That is the character. If Marvel wanted to make an Asian American Iron Fist, they can. They easily can now. There's nobody that's going to argue against it. You know, if it doesn't sell well, that's on their marketing team, but nobody's going to say there shouldn't be an Asian American Iron Fist or straight up Asian Iron Fist. There's nobody that will argue against that. Now, the other problem a lot of people had with Iron Fist was the choreography, the fight scenes, and I would make the argument that Finn Jones just came off of Game of Thrones, where he didn't really have any choreography training, or let alone any fight scenes. He was a very different character in that show. And when it comes down to filming TV, filming is done in blocks. And before you start a new show, you might have 5 or 6 weeks of training to figure out all the new moves that they want you to know. And in that 5 to 6 weeks, you're also learning the script. You're making sure all of your set times are right. They're making sure everybody else that's hired is also getting trained. They're making sure that everybody has insurance if somebody gets hurt. So you're going around signing paperwork. You know, it's a very long process. And in those 6 weeks, you might not get the full training hours in because you're busy going off and doing other things. You could even be working on another project at the same time, and you wouldn't be able to commit to those hours. So for the people complaining that Finn Jones wasn't trained to be Iron Fist, I would make the argument that he showed up for, you know, whatever hours he was scheduled for. I don't doubt that there wasn't anything that came out saying otherwise. But anybody that thinks it can only take 6 weeks to learn how to be a karate master or to learn the basics of kung fu fighting or any type of martial art, I would challenge them to go out and do that in 6 weeks, because it is nearly impossible to do that. And some people will say that the argument that it should have been an Asian or Asian American actor who has a martial arts background cast as Iron Fist. I reference that back to Danny Rand is a white man. There is nobody that can play Danny Rand except for a white man. Hate that for what you will, but it is the truth. And if you change that history, you are part of the problem. So I would hope that people will realize that his stunt team and defenders that he worked with definitely helped him improve on what he learned from his solo show. And I would assume that by season 2 of Iron Fist that he would have a much greater understanding of what is asked of him, especially now that, if you watch Defenders, he doesn't have that many cuts in his fights anymore. Sure, there are cuts here and there, but nothing to the point where it looks like they're trying to hide the fact that he can't, keep up with the stunt team. It also kind of looked like the stunt team in in Defenders was even fighting at half speed in a couple scenes that weren't even for him. It was for everybody else. When you're talking about an organization like the Hand coming in to fight somebody like Luke Cage or Jessica Jones, that choreography might even be more difficult for somebody like Kristen Ritter to be able to do, because she is a small woman. Kristen Ritter is very small, and while she did put on a little bit of muscle for that role, she's not going to actively go out there and try to flip 180-pound guys in black suits. There's no way that they're going to ask her to do that at full speed in a high-action fight scene. So I would argue that it was an all-around effort by Marvel to try to make sure that their actors are taken care of, but also to give asking for the fans to give the benefit of the doubt, because we are consuming their product and we want to see certain things that might not be possible yet. I would hope that by the time, if we get Defender Season 2, we can have the discussion of, alright, that person isn't fighting Jessica Jones at full speed, even though it's like a basic street fight. There isn't any real martial arts technique behind it. Whereas in Season 1 of Defenders, it's highly intense martial arts, where Danny Rand and Matt Murdock are really the only two guys that could possibly counter that in any way, where Jessica Jones and Luke Cage are the ones that are more street fighters in that sense. Now, the other thing I want to talk about today is a little movie on Netflix called Death Note. And for those that don't know, Death Note is an anime / manga in Japan from the early 2000s, and it's hard to explain this because everybody has different opinions on how they view certain anime or manga and the impact that it had on them. For me, when I first watched the Death Note anime, it wasn't anything special. When I watched it, it was a detective show that had a lot of murder in it, and when I watched it at 11 years old, 12 years old, maybe even 10 years old, I didn't really get the full scope of exactly what was happening. And for me, I guess that gave off the vibe that it was like a meh show. It wasn't really doing anything for me, but I didn't hate it. I was watching it because I thought the detective part of it was interesting. You know, at its core, Death Note is a detective series, and at the time in Japan, a lot of good detective series at the time. You know, we're talking about Yu Yu Hakusho, Death Note. Some could even argue that Digimon had a little bit of a detective feel to it. But overall, at the time, there really wasn't much else in that manner coming out of Japan. So it hit a niche market where it was filling the role for a detective series, but it also hit that, you know, bloody, gory, murdery aspect of anime fans as well. If you read the manga, it was even more bloody and gory. They really took things into detail in the manga, more so than they did the anime, because the anime was supposed to be for kids and teenagers, so they couldn't really show that much. Now, the base argument for anime is sub versus dubbed, which is subtitles versus voiceover that is in English as opposed to Japanese. And that argument will go on till the end of time for anime fans. It doesn't really matter which side you're on. What matters is, as long as you're consuming the content and paying for it, they can keep making more. And for Netflix to pick up this property and make an hour and 40-minute movie about it, you know, kind of says a lot about how they feel about the property, and the people that worked on the property, how they feel about it. Death Note works as a series, and it's proven that because it's a manga. It was designed to be a very long, drawn-out story. Compressing all of the emotion, all of the content, all of the feelings that you're supposed to have, and all the character development into 100 minutes doesn't really work that well. It doesn't work in that kind of compression. And I think one of the main reasons that the Death Note movie failed for Netflix is that compression. You know, when you try to tell the story of Light and L, it doesn't, you don't really get that dynamic in an hour and 40 minutes. It's almost impossible to complete that arc, that they are the opposite sides of the same coin, in a sense. And I'm going to get into spoilers here. In the series, you can easily tell that what Light wants to do is rid the world of evil people. And that is vigilante justice, for people that don't understand that. Now, what L does, he is a detective. He seeks out the people that commit murder. What happens with Light is that he finds the Death Note, starts writing people's names in it that are really bad people, gangsters and mass murderers and people of that sort. When these people start dying, disappearing, falling off the grid, it sends off a light bulb for L, and he has to step in and go, I need to find out what is going on, because there is no explanation morally or with evidential fact that all of these bad people are gonna start dropping like flies unless somebody's interfering. And the way Light hides his identity is by naming himself Kira. And for those that don't understand Japanese, Kira means two different things. I believe phonetically, Kira means light. And when it's written out, it means killer. So what Light does is, when he writes somebody's name in the Death Note, he leaves instructions that whoever shall die has to write out Kira as their final message in blood, I think. Maybe not for all the murders, but for a few of them that's what he did. And that was his secret identity as a killer, was to be Kira. And L is a very smart person, and it doesn't fool him that Kira is a very specific name to be used because it has two meanings. It means killer, but it also means light. And if your name is Light and you decide to use a synonym for your identity as a serial killer, it's not going to take the Scooby-Doo gang 20 minutes in a TV show to figure out your identity. Anybody with basic understanding of language would be able to go, maybe this Light guy is the killer. Who knows? They might not have proof or evidence, but if you can put two and two together, it's not that hard. It's not like it's an episode of NCIS where they hide all the interesting facts until the 35-minute mark, and then once you get the first fact, you can piece it all together and go, oh, the second guy was the one that killed everybody, or that woman that they passed on the streets, the killer, and she got away because they were looking for a man instead. It doesn't. I hate that the Japanese think Americans are so stupid that we wouldn't be able to put that together. And for a lot of people, they would say, well, Death Note was made for Japanese consumption because of all the connotations into the Yakuza and all that. But they knew it was going to get adapted to English. They knew it was going to come to America. So there was no way that they thought that we wouldn't be able to put two and two together. And I felt like that falls onto the manga writer to be able to make something more interesting and in-depth. Now, back to the Netflix show. The Netflix movie for Death Note, there was a big push against it because apparently it was whitewashed. Well, there's two things I'd like to discuss regarding that. And the first thing I'd like to discuss is that it was not whitewashed. The movie has an African American man playing the second protagonist in the entire show. The second protagonist, L, is African American in this English movie on Netflix. You cannot claim whitewashing if the second protagonist is of a different color or race than white. You could say that, oh, it was washed for American consumption by only hiring American actors for the roles. Sure, you can make that assumption, but to claim whitewashing would be false narrative and straight up lying. And the people that are trying to claim whitewashing are wrong, and they are liars. There is no reason why they couldn't cast white people in any or even all of the roles if they really wanted to. But there also isn't a reason why they couldn't cast Asian Americans or people of Asian descent. There's no reason for either argument. It's up to the discretion of the production company, the director, the casting agents. It's completely their discretion. I would assume what they were trying to push was, this is an American adaptation of an original Japanese anime, manga. They wanted to Americanize it to begin with. So, yes, putting white people in it definitely makes sense because it's an Americanized version of it. Saying that only white people should be in it is wrong. Hence why I think they went for the diversity hire for Elle. And I thought it was an interesting take to see Elle played by an African American actor, because in the Japanese adaptation, in the Japanese anime, they don't really give you any type of context to the races of anybody. You just assume everybody's Asian. There really is no context. So I was a little happy that they decided to give the role of the second protagonist to a person of color. I was happy about that because there should be more representation like that. You know, having Watari be an Asian actor makes sense. You know, having Light and having his dad be white makes sense because it takes place in Seattle. How many African Americans or Asian Americans or Middle Eastern people or any other ethnicity other than white live in Seattle? The ratio of diversity in Seattle isn't that high. It's growing, and it will definitely hit a peak soon, but Seattle has always been, in my mind, it's been a town for white people, and I find that to be the truth because it's dreary and rainy. Yes, Ed. Hi. Sorry. I have my cat here with me. She wanted to input some stuff too. There really isn't any reason why you couldn't do one or the other. But I'm glad that they decided to do something other than, we're just going to take a whole bunch of Asian actors and just completely remake the anime, but in live action. The one thing that made this adaptation stand out was that Willem Dafoe played Ryuk. And anybody that watched the original 3 Spider-Man movies from director Sam Raimi knows that Willem Dafoe should have always been Ryuk if they ever did an American adaptation. When they dubbed the anime for American consumption, Willem Dafoe should have been the voice actor. They made a mistake when they didn't have him do it, and they fixed that mistake by putting him in this movie as Ryuk. He fits that role perfectly, and I would argue that nobody else should play that character. If it's ever remade in an American adaptation, just reuse the audio. Fuck it. Who cares? There's not much else to say other than that, though. Overall, the film was lackluster. It felt rushed. I didn't get the character development, and the content was more or less gory for the sake of being edgy. It felt like they were making a movie just so that way they could please the edgelords, and I would rather see something that's well thought out and has taken the time to establish itself than something that's rushed and made to just be edgy. Now, my second argument for this topic is that the people that complain about whitewashing in anime or manga adaptations or any type of adaptation coming from a foreign country have not said anything about the Attack on Titan movie that came out in Japan, I believe, a year or two ago. It was a two-part movie event, and it was based on the novel Attack on Titan, Shingeki no Kyojin, and the film adaptation, while it was made in Japan, was completely Japanese. Now, in the actual story, in the manga itself, there is only one Asian character. Yeah, you heard me right. In a Japanese manga that is made into an anime that is critically acclaimed, highly popularized, only has one Asian character in it that we know of. And in the movie that they made in Japan, everybody was Asian. Where are the people calling for the dissent of that movie? Where are the people saying that that movie was Japanese washed or Asian washed, whatever you want to call it? Where are the people calling for the outrage on that? Because that manga, that anime, was 99.9% white people. It is based off of, from what I can understand, European European geography, to the point where you could probably narrow it down to even Germany or Poland is where it most likely takes place, if you really wanted to get technical about it. The main character's last name is Jaeger. Jaeger, I believe. I don't have it in front of me, but Eren Yeager is the main character. That name is European. There's no arguing that. When they draw that character, he is a white guy with brown hair. You know, the only Asian character in that entire show that we at least know of is Mikasa. And she is, they even say it in the show, they even say it in the manga, she is the last Asian in the, not in the world, but at least in the tight-knit community that we have based this entire geographical location on. She is the last Asian person that is known. And for people to not call out the bullshit of something being washed in a different way, where it should have been white people with one Asian actress. It should have been that way. If you're gonna complain that Iron Fist should have been Asian because it has kung fu in it, then you should argue that this anime adaptation, this manga adaptation that you're making into a movie, should have been 99% white people with one Asian actress, because that is what it is. There's no arguing the content there. Anybody that watches that anime goes, oh yeah, these are white people. You can clearly make the distinction that they are white. The way they are built, the way that their facial expressions are, the way that their hair is. Mikasa is the last Asian character in that universe because of how the universe is built. And for people not to call out the casting company or the producers or the director or just anybody in general that was on that film for not having the cast be how it should have been in the comics, from the comics, the manga, to me screams that there is no correct ideology in that line of thought. And I would want consistency. If we're going to make those arguments all day, every day, about how, Ed Skrein should step down from Hellboy because he's not Asian American, then why should we not have that conversation about how the Japanese completely washed one adaptation just so that way they can have 50 Japanese actors and actresses in one of their movies, which prominently features people of European descent. If we can't have consistency, what's the point? What's the point of making that argument at all? So, if I'm saying anything, I'm hoping that people pick up that I'm more or less wanting consistency in calling for social justice in certain scenarios, where I would hope that eventually we could just get past that, because it's a bullshit argument. If you want to make change with your dollar at the movie theater, or make change with your dollar when you purchase a Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime subscription or HBO subscription. Make that known with your wallet, because if you don't, Hollywood is still going to continue to do those things, and they will get away with it because people will pay to see it. They did it with Speed Racer, they did it with Ghost in the Shell, they've done it with Death Note. And that's nobody's fault but the people that support those things. Calling for that change won't do anything unless people stop giving it money. I watched the Death Note movie. I liked that Death Note movie because I thought it was exactly what it was meant to be because of my experience with Death Note. I thought it was a mid-tier anime when it came out. I thought it was a mid-tier movie. Didn't really change my perspective on it. To me, it's more about the characters and their development than it is about what the color of their skin is. We should be basing things off of their content, not their color. It's the whole reason we fought for civil rights in America. The whole reason we have anti-discrimination laws when it comes to employing people. You base people off of the content of their character and the work that they do, not the color of their skin or where they come from. And you have to stop using that as the other side of the argument too. If somebody should only have a job just because of the color of their skin, that's discriminating against people that are good actors, that should be able to get those jobs because of the material that is being presented. And I know it sounds contradictory, but it's the same fallacy with the argument for tolerance, where tolerance is good up until people start being intolerant just to be intolerant, and when they claim that aren't you supposed to be the tolerant one as their argument, that's where the line in the sand has to be drawn, where is if somebody is doing something out of hate or out of disrespect, and it's our job to make sure that that viewpoint isn't given a platform because it doesn't give any type of positive reinforcement or critique. If we're going to have a discussion about race or identity politics or anything of that sort, it has to come from a logical standpoint, and both sides have to understand the fallacies in their arguments before anybody can move forward and say this is the way it should be. I understand the logical fallacies in the racial casting because I believe that there should have been outrage for when Japan did something and nobody said anything. I understand the fallacy in that argument, but I'm calling out the inconsistencies in other people that didn't understand it. And because they stayed silent even after I explained it, that just shows that the only thing they care about is being part of an intolerant argument. And they're either jumping onto a bandwagon or they just want to make an argument against a certain race or group of people. And that's what we need less of. So if I'm saying anything today, and I hope I'm getting it across, is that we need to come together and accept that the best way to make change in entertainment is to give people in entertainment that we want to see the money directly. And the more we get content creators that will go out of their way to make product that more people will consume and more people will accept and take in, the better. And I hope that eventually down the line, we can stop having this argument about whitewashing in Hollywood. Because everybody's tired of it. People are tired of fighting for it. People are tired of trying to make claims against it because of the fallacies. It's just not good. And the only thing that it does to the entertainment industry is make them hire people that aren't good actors. And if we're going to start hiring people that aren't good actors, then I might as well put in an application at Hollywood, because, God damn it, there's got to be some shitty role for a 20-something white guy somewhere. Anyway, that's my little rant for the day. This has been Cappuccino Cunnilingus episode number 34. I'm sorry that I haven't been putting out episodes. I lost a little bit of audio from a couple of other episodes, so I don't have anything from those. I've been trying to find a new way to record everything since the previous company I was working with, Mixler, decided to get rid of their free audio recording, and they wanted to switch to a strictly premium version, and I already have a SoundCloud account. And if I really wanted to, I could use SoundCloud to record all of my audio and then export it and import it to YouTube. I'm not going to pay an extra $10 just to record my audio. I can do that for free with Audacity, and that's what I'm using today. I'm probably going to drop SoundCloud soon too, so expect new ways for me to put out content, because I think I might be switching directly to YouTube live streaming. And that's going to be an interesting thing, because I have gotten better with putting my voice out there. I haven't really put my face out there. And if I'm going to start doing that, I need to get more comfortable being in front of a camera. So until further notice, I'm going to try to do more live streaming and try to get more comfortable with recording video and audio, but for the time being, audio is going to be the way to go right now, and expect video soon. You can check out some of my other channels too, with Foxhole Gaming on YouTube. I'm going to start doing some more video game content since I just moved, and I'm getting my PlayStation 4 set up and my PC set up again. So I'm going to try to do a playthrough of the first Wolfenstein game that came out a couple years ago. And when the second game comes out in October, I'm hoping to be able to start a playthrough of that immediately afterwards. So expect those things, and maybe some more special content on that channel. But until then, I'm Rob, and this has been Cappuccino Cunnilingus, episode number 34. Good night, everybody.